What injury disease scares the shit out of you? Pucupo said. You'll be very pleased to know that it's much more diagnosable these days with modern EEGs and MRIs capable of detecting changes in brain activity. We're much more aware of it than in the past, and it's pretty standard to suspect locked-in syndrome now, at which point interventions can be made and it be treated like a disability rather than a vegetative state. Nat Geo Wild said. I had to. Many failed doctors told me I was fine, until 9 weeks later the buggers literally started crawling out of my legs in the middle of class. I had the entire emergency department in my room that night watching the extraction. I still have them sitting in a jar on my desk. My oath said. A botfly lay eggs in my sister's eye when she was 4. It took about a day for her to start saying her eye was sore and she got taken to the doctor. The eggs had hatched and started eating away at her eye. They did laser surgery almost immediately and thought they got them all, but a few days later she went for a checkup and there was still one left which they then also had to remove. Safe to say she still has 95% eyesight in that eye. Thank goodness we found it early. Squitch Tweak said. One of my family members had ALS. Thankfully it's not hereditary in our case, but it's clearly scared my family because no one wants to die like that. Other things that take your mobility aren't necessarily so bad. ALS is cruel in that people often lose mobility too quickly to really adjust and come to terms with it, but slowly enough that the suffering goes on for years. And the obvious big thing that it's fatal. The Last Leviathan said. Yes. My grandfather passed away before the dementia got really bad. He always recognized my grandma and immediate family, though there were a few times where he didn't, usually if he woke up during the night, and I pretended to be hotel assistant leading him back to his room. Telling him MR. Last name, Ipper room is at the end of the hall, your wife is already waiting for you. Took all of my composure and I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Thankfully by the next day he didn't remember the incident and recognized me again, but every time it happened, maybe half a dozen in total, I was so afraid of this being the final straw. Cloth Diaper Addicts said. These stories are why I support medically assisted deaths. That old man has lost his life partner, his memories, and ability to care for himself. There's no dignity in that. I absolutely think that people who will lose the essence of who they are due to illness should be given at least the opportunity for it. My husband's grandmother lived with Alzheimer's for the last 15-20 years of her life. She was nearly 100 years old when she died. Who benefited from keeping her alive in that state? She absolutely didn't. She couldn't do anything more than moan at the end. So it was a bed in a long-term care facility that could have gone to another less gone person. It took resources from our community health to keep a person's heart beating when that person was gone a long time ago. Opa Rosie said. I saved this ages ago. I wish I'd saved the original comment, but here it is. Rabies. It's exceptionally common, but people just don't often run into the animals that carry it. Skunks especially, and bats. Let me paint you a picture. You go camping, and at midday you decide to take a nap in a nice little hammock. While sleeping, a tiny brown bat, in the rage stages of infection, is fidgeting in broad daylight, uncomfortable and thirsty, due to the hydrophobia. You snore, startling him. He goes into attack mode. Except you're asleep, and he's a little brown bat who weighs around 6 grams. You don't even feel him land on your bare knee, and he starts to bite. His teeth are tiny. Hardly enough to even break the skin, but he does manage to give you the equivalent of a tiny scrape that will go completely unnoticed. Rabies does not travel in your blood. In fact, a blood test won't even tell you if you've got it. Antibody tests may be done, but are useless if you've ever been vaccinated. You wake up, none the wiser. If you notice anything at the bite site at all, you assume you just lightly scraped it on something. Opa Rosie said. The bomb has been lit, and your nervous system is the wick. The rabies will multiply along your nervous system, doing virtually no damage, completely undetectable. You have no symptoms. It may be 4 days, it may be a year, but the camping trip is most likely long forgotten. Then one day your back starts to ache. Or maybe you get a slight headache. At this point, you're already dead. There is no cure. The sole caveat to this is the Milwaukee Protocol, which leaves most patients dead, the survivors mentally disabled, and is seldom done. There's no treatment. It has a 100% kill rate. Absorb that. Not a single other virus on the planet has a 100% kill rate. Only rabies. And once you're symptomatic, it's over. You're dead. So what does that look like? Your headache turns into a fever, and a general feeling of being unwell. You're fidgety. Uncomfortable. As the virus that has taken its time getting into your brain finds a vast network of nerve endings, it begins to rapidly reproduce, starting at the base of your brain, where your pons is located. This is the part of the brain that controls communication between the rest of the brain and body, as well as sleep cycles. Next, you become anxious. You still think you have only a mild fever, but suddenly you find yourself becoming scared, even horrified, and it doesn't occur to you that you don't know why. Operosi said. This is because the rabies is chewing up your amygdala. As your cerebellum becomes hot with the virus, you begin to lose muscle coordination and balance. You think maybe it's a good idea to go to the doctor now, but assuming a doctor is smart enough to even run the tests necessary in the few days you have left on the planet, odds are they'll only be able to tell your loved ones what you died of later. You're twitchy, shaking, and terrified. You have the normal fear of not knowing what's going on, but with the virus doing its work on the amygdala as well, this is amplified 100-fold. It's around this time the hydrophobia starts. You're horribly thirsty, you just want water. But you can't drink. Every time you do, your throat clamps shut and you vomit. This has become a legitimate, active phobia of water. You're thirsty, but looking at a glass of water begins to make you gag and shy back in fear. The contradiction is hard for your hot brain to see at this point. By now, the doctors will have to put you on IVs to keep you hydrated, but even that's futile. You were dead the second you had a headache. You begin hearing things, or not hearing at all, as your thalamus goes. You taste sounds, you see smells, everything starts feeling like the most horrifying acid trip anyone has ever been on. With your hippocampus long under attack, you're having trouble remembering things, including your family. You're alone, hallucinating, thirsty, confused, and absolutely, undeniably terrified. Everything scares the literal shit out of you at this point. These strange people in lab coats. These strange people standing around your bed crying, who keep trying to touch you or get you to drink. Operosi said. Something, and it's only been about a week since the little headache that you've completely forgotten. Time means nothing to you anymore. Funnily enough, you now know how the bat felt when he bit you. Eventually, you slip into the dumb rabies phase. Your brain has started the process of shutting down. Too much of it has been turned to liquid virus. Your face droops. You drool. You're all but unaware of what's around you. A sudden noise or light might startle you, but for the most part, it's all you can do to just stare at the ground. You haven't really slept for about 72 hours. Then you die. Always, you die. And there's not one damn thing anyone can do for you. Then there's the question of what to do with your corpse. I mean, sure, burying it is the right thing to do. But the virus can survive in a corpse for years. You could kill every rabid animal on the planet today, and if 2 years from now, some moist, preserved, rotten hunk of used-to-be brain gets eaten by an animal, it starts all over. By you Hotogin. Potato Pixie 90210 said. This right here is one of the reason I am terrified of this virus. The other is that I work with rescue dogs and whole Ireland hasn't had a case in what seems like forever. I am very aware of two things. Regarding rabies, we don't know a dog's background sometimes. They could have been brought over from a country with active rabies cases. Regarding tetanus, I do most of the repair work. A lot of old wiring, fencing, metalwork, etc. I ain't fucking around with that shit, especially rabies. Zero cure. I honestly think if I had it, I'd kiss my family goodbye and just hop myself. Cat Spigimus said. Rabies for me too. I have always been the person to save the bat in the house, feed the raccoons, pet anything that lets me, etc. Definition of the meme of dying petting something I shouldn't. A few years ago I was bitten by a raccoon. Then chased by it. Still not sure if it was ill, it wasn't caught. Still, I had to go through the entire rabies shot sequence. The follow-up shots were not fun, fever, chills, nausea for a day or two, but the shots they gave around the bite site in the ER were the worst pain I have ever experienced. I have broken bones, cut myself to the bone, had multiple stitches and been hit by 2 cars. Nothing hurt like the 30-45 shots around that tiny bite. I sobbed like a kid and snapped at a nurse, not my MO, shall we say, and I'm still paying that med bill 5 years later. I am now pretty much terrified of any creature who can carry rabies. I read a bunch of stuff about rabies after the incident. Stupid, I now know. Long-time Reddit users probably know just which thing I read, too. I feel like such a wuss, and my rep is shot, lol, but I can't help it. I had to have a guy save me from a bat in the house last year cause I just could not handle it and refused to try to catch and release it. I'd probably relocated at least 9 bats in my life, and this one just brought me to my knees. The thought of certain death, from something that might be so small you never know it happened. Erwin Heisenberg said, Lesch-Nyhan syndrome. Imagine what it feels like to want to bite your fingernails. You know there's a risk that it might hurt if you go a little too hard, but you do it anyway. No biggie, right? Now ratchet it up about 10,000-fold. Now, you're thinking about wanting to bite off the tips of your fingers. Hell, sometimes the whole goddamn thing. And there's nothing you can do to stop yourself. It's an absolutely uncontrollable compulsion. You must follow through. And you know how much it will hurt, and you were horrified by the thought of mutilating yourself, but your body practically acts against your will. And it's not just your hands. By the time you can form words, you've likely chewed off your own lips, taken pieces off of your own tongue, eaten holes in your cheeks. If you're particularly unlucky or had good aim, you've lost an eye by the time your parents got a diagnosis. The only thing that protects you from yourself is near constant supervision and 4-point restraints. Oftentimes, total dental extraction is a necessity as well. And the self-mutilating behavior extends beyond the physical. Your mind will tell you to act directly against your own self-interest and desires. Your brain will command you to berate and assault your loved ones, refuse your favorite meals, and deliberately fail assessments on which you desire to succeed. Your only saving grace is that you are likely to die young. But you likely have to exist this way for at least 15 years before your kidneys finally give out. I lost my faith completely when I found out this existed. Suitcasa Dreaming said, God same. I hadn't realized how bad burns were until I recently got a small first-degree steam burn on my little finger and it hurt so badly I couldn't sleep. On that note, always wear oven mitts when picking up the top bowl from a bain-marie water bath double boiler. Even if the bowl itself seems cool enough to touch, the steam from underneath can rush up and burn your hands when you lift it, which will also cause you to fling the glass bowl of melted chocolates across the floor, and it will take you like 3 hours to clean up the melted chocolate and broken glass everywhere while also nursing your burnt fingers. Learn from my mistakes. Trask Facts 11 said, low chance of survival. One of the lowest of any cancers. If caught early on it's treatable, but the issue is it's not usually caught early. Because of the location of the pancreas, it's very difficult to catch early. By the time you're having symptoms to even think it's pancreatic cancer, it's already too late. Usually when it's finally spotted, you're near the end. It doesn't move fast and it's painful as fuck if it causes pancreatitis. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was diagnosed in Obama's first term and lived with it until 2020. Cloth Diaper Addicts said, FWIW, I have 2 cousins who broke their necks in motor vehicle accidents. One broke his neck in a drunk driving accident and survived the first time. The second drunk driving accident, around 8 years later, he was 12 years older than me and it was in the early 90s, killed him. My other cousin broke her neck when she and her husband were riding their motorcycle together and a teen hit them. Her husband was closer to death than she was, though. He was in a medically induced coma for a few days, and lost a leg. The moral is don't drink, text and drive. Both kill and cripple people. System Down Zero said, fatal familial insomnia, FFI, is a disease that does not allow you to sleep. First off, bad enough, no sleep, really sucks. Yet you're slowly dying. Pain becomes worst. You basically can't do anything, but lay on your bed and count the days to your death. A tattoo artist documented the whole experience on YouTube. Rip to the dude though. Lady Sajeric said, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, also known as motor neuron disease and Lou Gehrig's disease? It's a degenerative neurological disease that causes your motor neurons, the nerves that control your voluntary muscles, to start dying for unknown reasons. This leads to a progressive loss of movement throughout the body until eventually the patient is completely incapable of moving. though many patients do retain voluntary eye movement. Most patients retain their cognitive functions and awareness right to the end, so many would be aware that they're stuck in an unresponsive shell. There's no cure and treatment is just palliative. Very few drugs exist even try to give the patient more meaningful time because they die so quickly. They usually die within 2 to 5 years of receiving their diagnosis. My great-grandmother died of ALS, so ever since I was old enough to understand the stories about how she died, I've thought it has to be one of the worst ways to go. Nat Lubate said, "My sister had this and was told to essentially ignore your headaches because now you are like everyone else who has headaches by the surgeon who did her second brain surgery wrong. If my parents ignored my sister like the doctor told them to do and not had gone to another state for another surgeon to do brain surgery on her, she probably would have killed herself because of the pain. I'm so sorry it's inoperable." NASA Watcher 553 said, "There's too many for my anxiety-ridden mind to list here, so I shall pick a select few. Kuru, a disease spread through literal cannibalism. It scares me too much to describe. Nigleria fowleri, it essentially eats away your brain until you die and last. Ophiocordyceps unilateralis. While so far it only affects insect-based organisms, I can't help but think, what if it could affect humans? The fact that, yes, we would essentially become zombies, thank you The Last of Us, but the fact we would likely be conscious during the turning process and afterwards, thank you The Last of Us." Rats with Reddit said, "Radium poisoning. It's not ever gonna happen to me, I hope, but God do I get chills whenever I read about the Radium Girls' injuries. The Radium Girls are actually super interesting, and super fucking important, so I recommend researching them if you can stomach it. Not many people know about them, and it's really sad. Here's a good YouTube video by Georgia Marie, and I highly recommend the book The Radium Girls by Kate Moore. It's long, but super worth it." Ms. Frazzle said, "Copped. I already get pulmonary embolia in both lungs on and off. I have 63% lung function. Asthma. Restricted airway. I've had a tracheoesophageal reconstruction and a tracheostomy for a while as a child. To only have enough energy to make the bed or walk to the bathroom, just putting clothes on is exhausting. Being exhausted all the time. Be kind to your lungs, folks." Mutant Enzyme said, "I have a chronic digestive disorder and multiple food intolerances such that it is hard for me to get enough vitamin C from food sources. Due to my many sensitivities to added ingredients, I have trouble with nearly all dietary supplements. A few years ago, I was getting almost no vitamin C, only a tiny bit from sweet potatoes, and I was terrified that eventually I'd end up dying from scurvy. Fortunately, I found a buffered vitamin C supplement that I tolerate, and I've been taking it every day. It helps me with multiple conditions." Curious Chemicals said, "Oh my god. Mine doesn't seem particularly stress-related, it's just random. And I totally know how it is when you wake up relieved, feel so exhausted so you just doze back again, right back into it. I've learned to get up and wake up all the way with the bathroom light to clear my head. Sometimes I feel the need to eat something sugary and then I'm okay to go back to bed." Delta Jim said, "Alzheimer's dementia. Losing all my memories, my sanity, and who I am is terrifying. And, given that both my grandmas had it, I'm at increased risk of it. Locked-in syndrome or anything that causes full paralysis or severe brain damage. I plan to have in my will that, in the event of such things, I want to die. And anyone at all who objects is to be thrown into my grave with me, so they get to experience something resembling what they wanted to subject me to. Any injury that bleeds a lot. I have a phobia of blood, so the sight of a lot of it terrifies me." Mervyn Ernemise Mervyn said, "Type 2 diabetes. Seeing my mom live in complete denial for the last 20 or so years and YOLO her health had resulted in neuropathy, kidney failure that requires dialysis, glaucoma and amputations and a host of other issues resulting from the amputation. She's 62 and maybe has another year, if all goes well. But she was a lifelong smoker, so she is not working against her. I used to be so angry at her for not following a simple nutritional diet plan for her diabetes. She never even checked her blood sugar because she would get anxious with what the result would be. Unchecked diabetes is just a slow death." Hannibal Windigo said, "Any treatable cancer. Cancer treatment sucks. I had this relative who had cancer in the bowels, He spent almost 2 years battling it, had a bag hanging on his belly to take his poop. He only accepted treatment after metastases because his wife asked him. At some point it was so bad that he had a minor injury in his arm, and instead of healing it turned into bone cancer. He went through hell even though he hadn't the energy for it. In the end, a brain tumor got him. When he died, we all got scared because the picture in his ceremony didn't even look like him anymore. Honestly, if I ever have cancer, it better be operable, because I ain't going through that shit. Hedgon said. Cancer. Lost my dad in January to melanoma, which was diagnosed too late, so it spread to his lungs. He was genetically unsuitable for anything other than immunotherapy, which didn't work. We were told 4 months. He didn't last 5 weeks. I smoke, have done for years, mostly weed, but I use tobacco with it and joints. My dad wasn't a smoker and was an incredibly healthy man. My mom is a heavy smoker, and now I can't stop worrying I'll see her get sick too, or that I will get it. I know it isn't good to worry, but after the trauma of watching my father basically degenerate as a person rapidly over the 5 weeks, it's all I can think about. Ancient Iwatrist said. Split brain syndrome, when the connection between the two halves of your brain is severed. From what little I understand, when the connection is lost, left brain and right brain are two individuals living in one body, and only one of them is actually able to communicate with the outside world. It gives a whole new meaning to the phrase never let your right hand know what your left hand is doing. I highly recommend CGP Gray's video on this subject. He explains it better than I ever could. Ramth Vacuous Plushie said. Most neurodegenerative diseases and conditions, as I've seen the decline up close thanks to family and friends. But biggest, hidradenitis suppurativa, a hereditary chronic, basically incurable skin condition causing painful lumps to form under the skin. These recurring lumps tend to enlarge, displace healthy tissue, and drain blood and pus. Add to the beautiful sight the knowledge that these lumps grow in sensitive locations like the armpits, groin, under the breasts, etc. These painful, pus-draining lesions can affect mobility and basic quality of life. Even with excessive care to hygiene, one can potentially smell of death when just trying to do normal tasks. And they can also be fatal when combined with other factors. My father died of systemic organ failure after getting a blood infection stemming from one of his boils lumps. He unknowingly had diabetes, which drastically slowed down healing, and his hospital doctors were not very knowledgeable on his condition. If you think you or someone you know may have this condition, please talk to a doctor about it. There are more treatments and medications available today than ever before, and it's a condition that is best when caught in its earliest stages. Catch it early, guys and gals.